Data is the thing that runs through everything. You can't see everything,
Yeah. We had a really interesting practice this afternoon with Line Community as well. That was really good. Just kind of an opportunity for them to ask questions that are kind of, really bugging them. So it's quite helpful. No, it was very informal.
Yeah.
It was just tell me what's that,
Yeah.
where things are up to. Yeah. I don't know. How's that?
Can I go? Ready? Here we go. Stand up. I'm sure it's really. It's nice to have like figures to do. My challenge is well, listen. Welcome. I have 3 jobs to do, and then I'll get out of the way of the main event and the conversation. I think the first is thank sponsors. They are listed here: Lydian, Kamos, Noma, Northcoast, BTC. Yes, Manchester University. In truth, these things wouldn't happen without there's people being involved in it. And then we were a kind of family trying to get a debate happening about things that we all care about and that are stimulating and interesting and matter. So, massive thank you. Second thing I think that is sort of really important, and this is my second outing after, we seem to be coming together quite quickly after having Mary Mansfield here, is that, in truth, I think the co-op is really, and this isn't about the co-op, this is about creating a platform in which we have debates about things that actually matter and stimulating debates that, in truth, I think are at the heart of what the co-op's about. So the reason we're involved in the Federation, grateful for having the friends that we do in the room and the wider engagement, is that we're really interested in how technology and data and all of the work that we're involved in is used to power good growth, sort of term I use. How are these forces used in the world to create kind of shared value for people and communities in a way that powers kind of growth in a good way that's sustainable and economically viable and valuable? Now, I don't say that on the basis that I think the unicorns who are meeting in London today and we're number 10 are the enemy. I don't think they are, but I think part of what we're trying to do is to create a platform in which businesses are welcome to explore those new opportunities, social value and social growth. And 2, that we create an environment in which conversations happen about things that really matter and are complex and difficult and don't actually have the right answers, but in discussing them, we raise the profile of them, we all learn a bit of stuff, and I think the world gets better as a result of that. And this is one of those subjects. And I'm gutted because I'd love to be staying for the whole event, but I unfortunately can't, because this is an area of business that I've been involved in for a very long time, going all the way back into the older days, into the genesis of dunnhumby and PubCard and all of those things. And in truth, I think one of the things about this whole debate around data and data privacy is it matters massively because it's at the heart of everything we do. Fundamentally, it is a sort of fuel that enables so many of the things that we're doing. And of course, at the apex of that, as we have seen in the last few months, fundamental questions, commerce and ethics. What's the right thing to do with this valuable asset? In this case, borrowing that data, we have to look after it, protect it, and create a value exchange between us and our customers. Now, I do not know as much as Aurelie does about data and data privacy, and so I am massively excited that she's chosen to come here and talk to us about a subject in which she is a super expert, an eloquent, not only expert, but practitioner and a stimulator of debate that I think is very, very necessary. I'm sure all of you know her. She's a lecturer, she's a renowned speaker, she advises the EU on privacy, and in her own right is a practitioner in the data engineering and privacy space. And so I'm very grateful that you've chosen to come here and share your stimulation with us. The format is that she will come up and do exactly what she does brilliantly well, and then there's a panel debate about that. And the final thing is just to thank Emma and the team for continuing to create such a brilliantly stimulating set of content and agendas, and I hope it was a brilliant evening, and I'm very grateful to the participants and for all of you for coming. So I shall hand over to you. Welcome to the stage. Thank you.
No pressure, right? Like, oh my God, thank you so much. When I talked to Emer that we were going to discuss, she focused on ethics, which is now that the GDPR has been enforced, kind of the buzzword of the year. And I've been fortunate enough to be part of the ethics advisory group of the European Data Protection Supervisor that started 2 years ago with the GDPR is there, what do we do next? Because compliance is one thing, but the law can't solve everything. And so in my discussion today, I would like to talk a bit about the changing of our societies brought about by data, and also the values of basically our societies that we're trying to put forward. When I was hearing the introduction, I was reminded of an interesting book I read many years ago, which was The History of Chocolates. At the time in Brussels, which was actually about the Cadbury family and how they had evolved. And within that book, and I really recommend you read that, it talked about their influence on the community around it, which kind of disappeared once they got acquired, I suppose, by Kraft at some point. But the history of that family and those generations and the challenges of those generations as well was really interesting read. So if you're looking for more inspiration that actually comes from this island, the history of chocolate and the Cadbury family is interesting as well. So digitization challenges and our values as citizens, I wanted to start with this picture. Who knows what that is or who that person is? No? Any ideas? This is Eleanor Roosevelt in 1948. I think she convinced her husband to push for the Declaration of Human Rights after the United States came to help us out with the history we experienced during World War II. And it came about because of World War II. Because things happened during World War II where we thought, it's maybe something we've learned from and something we don't want to be repeated one way or another. And well, things evolve over time. We've had peace for 70 years in Europe. Obviously, it's not perfect. And I saw an interesting video a couple of years ago now, if you've seen it. Patrick Stewart asking the cabinet of ministers what the European Convention of Human Rights ever did for the UK. So we'll probably share it after the event is on. That's very good with technology from time to time. Don't let it invent it because it's too complicated. But look it up. It's really worth reviewing again for the times that we did it today. And so when I saw this and I thought about our values, my question was, do you know what this morphed into? What did the Human Declaration of Human Rights and then that other document morph into? It's something that's not very sexy. And this week, a couple of days ago, I was in Berlin trying to explain to data engineers what the rights of data subjects were within the GDPR. I said, don't read the GDPR. Don't read the 99 articles and the 173 recipes. Don't do that. read the charter. And something I've learned also through time is that I've always thought about technology as the ultimate legal blocks. You know, my husband has a lot of legal from my son, and this is how I see technology. You put things together and you build them and things like that. It's super interesting. But I learned through these ethics is rule of law. It's the fact that we can create concept, we can say something happened during the 1940s that we think is not acceptable. And we are going to translate that into certain values that will drive our society forward. And even though these values are not technical recommendations, they are the basis for building towards the society that we actually want. And within these concepts, obviously you've heard all about this idea of consent, as we all got these floods of emails a couple of weeks ago saying, yes, I agree, or if you don't agree, then we will delete you forever and your life is horrible. But within these concepts of consent, we also have concepts such as data controllers, who are the company responsible for using the data in a certain way. But what the GDPR certainly wants to do as well is reintroduce this idea of data subjects, the rights of data subjects, rebalance within the GDPR. And something I tell also a lot of engineers is, you also are a data subject. You're not just an employee of the company developing stuff. You are a father, or you are a husband, or you have children. As such, you should think about these evolutions and the responsibilities within the data ecosystems that we all build. So this is valuable for our consumers, our customers, but also us as parents or caretakers to say, I am a data subject, and the rule is there to give you the law is supposed to actually exert those rights and say, oh, I would like my data to be used like this or like that. And in that sense, the GDPR is like the first step forward, is to say these are the basic rules. Now we need to figure it out. And the next steps will probably be also what is ethics for our societies and how is data changing our societies, which is something I want to talk about. Now, what we're also seeing is obviously we run a global environment. So in that sense, well, in 1948, this wonderful woman did push for this regulation. We are seeing that we don't really see rights in the same way, and certainly we do not data in the same way across the different continents. And so this is a quote from an interesting paper by Paul Schwartz, who talks about this idea that, well, we talk about the right to privacy or data protection. Privacy is kind of the word, so we don't really like that. But in the United States, it's more a discussion about marketplace. And so discussions about ownership, who owns the data. In that sense, we're not still out of these conversations, because the European institutions do not want to talk about data ownership, because you can't own a right. But we still have to think about this and debate about this with philosophers to see how we move this forward and build something that is viable in the long term on a global level. This is also taking over within the GDPR. The GDPR recognizes, well, that technology has changed our societies, but it's also open. And this is something that a lot of people actually forget often, is that, well, it's not about not allowing you to use data, and rules around how you actually use data, making sure you're accountable for the use of that data. And so the GDPR, and this is where the slides went wrong, is actually grounded within the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And I put this slide up to Justice on the topic. Basically, the GDPR reflects Article 8 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, whereas e-privacy reflects Article 7. There's still a debate going on currently about e-privacy. And e-privacy is about the right to privacy in your home. So it's going to discuss and define how our devices are basically going to use the data. And certainly if you think about the long term, about this idea of Internet of Things and connections between data streams, we know also that in the long term, this idea will not be viable either. So we'll have to define something new. What is, however, already within the Charter of Fundamental Rights is this idea of human dignity, which should be inviolable and what we learned from the 40s of continental Europe. That certain uses of data were not ideal, that people suffered because of uses of data, and we should respect the data. The challenges that we'll probably see next, and I'll talk a bit about that as well, is reflected by the picture of Anne Frank, which talks about the fact that, well, she should be able to choose how she lives her life. So this is not about dignity in a certain time, it's about autonomy. And being allowed to make decisions about your life and not feeling nudged towards obligations because you get recommendations and you kind of feel that you don't have choices anymore. And as often happens, well, actually art reflected that one way or another. I don't know if you've seen the movie Gattaca a couple of years back. It's not recent. But they really pinpointed this idea of loss of autonomy. The main character was not born with the right DNA, and in that sense, his entire life was defined. And he challenges that, and he actually succeeds in challenging that. I think watching Gattaca is an interesting window into what might happen as we all share and swap our space and share it with Ancestry.com or 23andMe to define where we actually come from, but where we go to within the privacy policies that their DNA, forever, and also has consequences for DNA because they can share DNA with our families. So interestingly, these issues of autonomy touch upon also group privacy. So not only what the GDPR touches upon today, but challenges we need to think for. Questions that we are facing. I typically compare legislation based in Spain. So maybe you visited the Sagrada Familia by Gaudi, and it's like a cathedral that keeps on being built. But I think this is how I also see one of the funds that comes from the charter and where e-privacy is going to be built on top. And related to that, we have other legislations as well that kind of try to align one way or another. And the reason why we're building this was because we have new challenges. We have systems, economic systems, where we define that GDP defines whether our societies are doing well. So everything is about economic growth when you listen to the news. And sometimes you have questions, you wonder, is that actually good? Living in Spain, I saw that, for example, GDP influenced by tourism went from 5% to 10%. Tourism now accounts for 10% of GDP in Spain. Is that a good thing? I'm actually worried sometimes when I see how developments are being done within Spain. So certain things need to be questioned. I've seen the European Commission Ethics Advisory also talk about the future of work. And when I listen, for example, to the United States, they talk about the loss of jobs. And where the European Commission actually divided this in 3 chunks. They said, well, the first one is about the relationship between employer and employee. The second one is about making sure that you have enough money to survive. But the third one is about living life. So it's another way of thinking about what are we going to face moving forward. So I have a very basic plan. My objective is to find happiness one way or another. These are questions we need to find as well. What is happiness? How do we live fulfilling lives one way or another? The last point here is also maybe kind of a tantrum, or maybe not that hard. Again, discussions of ethics in the UK, where there's this term, human flourishing, that keeps popping up. And this is where continental Europe asks questions. We say human flourishing is very individual. Is it just about me? Isn't it also about making sure that from generation to generation we remain solidar with each other? So be careful. Well, through this cathedral, we try to address basically two things: respecting the Charter of Fundamental Rights and building a digital single market. Whether it's too late or too soon, or the train has already left the station, is not quite clear. But where we are going to lead, I think, is when it comes to making sure that we live lives according to our values, even though we go towards digitalization. And as I said, it doesn't sit by itself. We're talking about a cathedral. So privacy is there, but also interoperability or roaming. You don't pay as much when you go from one country to another. And this is because that's what Europe is trying to build, this idea of digital single market. So a couple of weeks ago, I was in London, and I saw this banner. It's really something the data science community is based upon. This idea that I have a problem and I try to solve it. And I heard stories of maybe about the different problems they had. The one was somebody who said that they built an app to make sure that their mother took their medication, which is nice. It's an interesting use of technology. My question was, why don't you live with your mother? And the guy responsible for ethics at the European Commission said, I actually have the same question. So it really depends on how you look at these problems as well. What are you solving for? And as I read more and more about AI and self-driving cars, I'm like, are these the problems that I'm actually facing in my society? So from there, I wondered, do the values, our values that we're trying to solve, or the societies we live in? I had another story from a friend of mine called Martin. He's in his 70s, and what he wants is a car that could actually tell him when he has to brake, because, well, he's getting older and a bit slower. And so again, sitting next to the guy from the ethics board, I was like, does he have a driver's license? Would we allow him on the roads in Europe? I'm not really sure. I love Martin, I have no problems, but he was kind of looking for something that would maybe not be acceptable within our societies. So values, I think, influence problems we try to solve for the societies and even the history. And this is, I think, why we are kind of diverging for the moment with certain continents, because our history is a bit different as well. So I promised that I would talk a bit about my children, because it's like an easy topic for me. And to explain to you a bit how the values have changed within societies, but also what I'm doing about it. Which is great. My 6-year-old, when she was 4, started studying ABC, thanks to YouTube. I love that. Wonderful, technology is wonderful. Having said that, she also had nightmares because she saw an advertising with the Angry Birds that should not have been there. So compliance is great, but it's not wonderful. When I talked to Romeo from Angry Birds about this, they were like, yes, well, we actually tag the different ads, well, apparently that one should filter through the system. So that wasn't wonderful. when we talk about values, and my children told me to lie as well. You know, if there's something that's changed in terms of values for my kids, I don't always say the truth. I don't know if I do, but that's not easier. So I lie about my weight. Obviously, nobody knows my my husband said. Engineering as well as to the privacy officers within your company. And then they smirked and they said they don't ask the right questions, which is also true. So in that sense, what I'm also seeing when it comes and when I talk about this to other parents, they're a bit surprised. We have a conversation, we actually understand. We want our kids to take advantage of technologies, but at some point, sometimes may be a problem somewhere. So my kids started early with iPads, not before the age of 2, but before. We have tons of this stuff lying around all the time. And it's just now that I'm starting to read articles about the fact that kids should have screen time and things like that. So obviously technology is changing different things, and apparently the brain of my kids, which worries me day and night, very bad mother. So there are negative things about technology, but also positive ones. So my son uses Scratch from MIT to learn how to code. He really likes that. He does theater and he doesn't play football, which for instance is very complicated. Good and bad things about technology. And something I saw also a couple of months ago was this idea that, well, we got dirty when we were kids. We kind of, were next to palms and things like that. And I had a challenge today with Spanish parents because I would like my kids to do cycling. And they want my kids to wear helmets. I'm like, you don't wear a helmet to go cycling? That's really weird. But apparently it's legal, so I'll have to about that. But what we're clearly seeing is yes, shifts. Things are changing within our societies, and I did a comparison also with the seatbelt a couple of years ago. I don't know if you remember, when I was young, we didn't have any seatbelts. It didn't exist in cars. Now, when I get in the car and my mother-in-law gets in the car and talks to me, she doesn't put on her seatbelt. So my car kind of blinks all the time. But it's, things have evolved since those no seatbelt cars that I knew in the 1970s. So in that sense, things are changing. Obviously, I need to buy helmets for my kids, but other things are changing as well. So what we're seeing, for example, and certainly also for my children, they seem to be obsessed by certain representations of themselves in the digital. And this is also interesting, for example, looking at the French, who consider that I am not my data. My data is not a representation of me. Unfortunately, the French talk about this in French and don't translate in English for the moment, so nobody knows about this. But I think one of these shifts is this idea that me as an individual and me as a digital subject is probably not the same, and the fact that I'm being transferred into some form of digital vulnerabilities and harms to individuals. I certainly see that with my kids who seem to care about the likes and the stars and things like that. And it's not you as a value. You're not valued because you have more stars and more likes. It doesn't make you a better person. So we we're kind of moving from this kind of analog life towards this digital life. I worked in digital for 15 years. And I remember a friend of mine saying also, well, I need to do something that is not cyber, that's not bits and bytes. I want to bake bread and see things grow, because this is also what makes me happy. And those values within digital are not the same that we see in real life. So we have to be very careful about how this is going to change. Well, is that kind of wisdom of the crowds is imposing things on us. People decide that this is a good thing, whereas we used to have institutions that gave us directions. So certainly, is that wisdom of the crowds, or is that mob rule one way or another? And that threshold is very dangerous. We go from, this is a good suggestion for you, if you bought this, you might want to buy this as well, towards kind of nudging, but at what point does nudging become manipulation? If people use gaming sites and their psychological profiles, manage everything. Away from this idea, and we're trying to score everything. Moving towards this idea that you are better or worse because you have us down and things like that. Is that the kind of society we want to actually build? And then what we're also seeing is that it goes beyond just our own individuals. It goes towards this idea that we're starting to converge with machines. Machines are being part of us. And in that sense, when I saw, for example, Google Glass the first time, I was really scared. It's like, I don't specifically want that. But watching my kids from time to time, I'm like, oh, I wish that was so absolutely wonderful. But I still have the decision to use a tool or not use a tool and not be driven by these tools. And that is basically the questions that we'll have to ask moving forward, is also if our extensions of ourselves are being part of our bodies one way or another. Who decides how these extensions are actually going to work? What are the thresholds? What is acceptable? Are we going to adapt to these extensions? Shouldn't it be the other way around? And this is again where the French have talked about it to us. So, and the last bit that we're seeing is also this idea that we used to be responsible. I made these decisions, and now as systems are getting more and more complex, is being one way or another being pushed through the ecosystems, and allocation and attribution of responsibility are becoming more and more complex to define. So our values are really changing, and the last example is one that relates to the judicial system. So maybe this is also a movement. Ooh, no, maybe this is an image of a movie that you might have seen as well. It's Minority Report. So the codes that actually estimate when a crime might happen and basically go after people before even crime actually happens. So what happens to this idea of we're innocent until proven guilty? It puts pressure on our judicial systems and the way we actually think about how our values are being represented within our societies. And this is partially already going on. So maybe you've heard about the black boxes used for algorithm decision making about how long the sentences would be in American judicial systems. That would never exist under European legislation because you have the right to understand how certain decisions are being made. The fact that these algorithms exist and that these companies have no obligations as to how they explain how they came to these explained sentences makes it for a society that might go in the wrong direction one way or another. So it's very worrying, actually. The power of data and how it's being used in the notion of accountability should be questioned. And we should have discussions about how this is changing our society. So this is also something that was related to that. Basically, who am I as a human being related to data? How do I feel within our societies? And the nature of basically being human, and where I get back to this initial question, which is, what is happiness? How can I find happiness, and how can I find balance? Within a society that doesn't accept risk anymore, I don't have to be happy all the time. And this is something I'm trying to teach my kids as well. It's okay to be sad or lost, but as long as you live a fulfilling life in the long term. So within the work done at the Ethics Advisory Group, basically we explored different values and came up with recommendations. So it's a document you can actually find online. You can read, it's very philosophical. But where we put forward certain values, obviously dignity, it was the obvious one within the Charter of Fundamental Rights. But also this idea of freedom, how do I choose my life and how can I make sure that I'm actually autonomous to make decisions about my life one way or another. The need for, because we are feeling that this is eroding because of the lack of accountability within our societies one way or another. And hopefully, thankfully, I still see this within my children. They are solidary. But I have to keep reminding them. I have an obligation as a parent to remind them that they should treat people equally, but they should also be solidary with the kids around them. Obviously, discussions about democracy. We've all heard about Cambridge Analytica. I don't know if you follow series such as, for example, The Good Fight. It's an interesting series that follows the good wife. And that recently actually talked about nudging judges in certain courts in the United States by micro-targeting false news to them. So when I saw that episode, it was like, technically, that's totally possible. Technically, I have no doubt whatsoever that that is possible. Whether it happens, I don't know. How did Brexit happen? How did the elections happen? There is room for that. Obviously, also discussions about the judicial system. And I think this is one of the most challenging aspects of our societies we have today. Because time, when we talk about data, is of essence. Timing is very important. And what we've seen when it comes to privacy and data protection legislation is that the time that you complain and you put your requirements in front of the court and the court takes a decision is very long. In the meantime, data processing operations continue. So for example, within the GDPR today, we consider IP addresses to be personal data. It took 10 years to get there. So the fact that our judicial systems are slow is actually impeding democracy, and we need to find solutions related to that. And then the last of the values that we put forward for debate and discussion at the end of the year about ethics is this idea of trust. What does trust mean? A couple of years ago, it came back to this idea of ranking. It was at Airbnb, for example, that person got scored, 4 stars, and so I trust them and things like that. That's not really trust. But how do we make sure we continue to build trustworthy societies, knowing that we work in a more globalized environment? So how am I going to show trust for a person I know in Singapore, where they're not my neighbor anymore? So it brings about new challenges to our societies. So we came out with a couple of recommendations, also within the white paper, which I again invite you to comment about. It was really the last part that I wanted to talk about. What we're seeing is that we are also moving towards a society of more commoditization. I don't know if you've noticed, but a couple of years ago, you could buy a cheap fridge, an expensive fridge, and a medium fridge. Today, that medium has disappeared. It's either very cheap or horribly expensive. So every product that we basically buy is one extreme or the other, kind of that monetization. And I see it when I look at, for example, students like go inside their dorm rooms and they all buy stuff at IKEA. And they have the feeling that they all have the same dorm rooms. And in that sense, I think it's dangerous because if we commoditize everything, everything has basically the same value. We don't make any kind of differentiations. This might happen to individuals as well. We might move our values from persons to personal data and say, oh, your only value is actually your data, which is not the case. We have to be very careful about how our societies are evolving and what is actually happening with personal data. So I found this interesting comic a couple of months ago, which talks about the fact that, well, certain tools needed data about the children to make sure that they were learning. And they needed the data about the children to make sure that they are learning the right thing. And then our individuals, whereas our individuality is very separate from what our data actually is. And when you think about this, it's another movie we've seen before. I tried showing Matrix to my 10-year-old, and then my mother-in-law said he's too young. But he does care about his privacy because he was taught actually to create different identities and to use his data in a specific way. Unfortunately, I had to tell him how to lie. So what have I done so far related to the education of my children? Well, there's a very interesting book called the European Handbook for Teaching Privacy and Data Protection in Schools. And a couple of months ago, I was watching the ICO, and they were talking about more educated subjects, that citizens need to understand better what is actually going on within our societies with data. And so somebody asked the question, said, are you starting these education programs? And the ICO said, yes, we're reaching out to Google. I was watching that from Spain, I was like, how is that possible? You don't have the same incentives, you don't have the same obligations within societies. So in Spain, they started a long time ago discussing about bullying. And there are guides for families. I put on parental controls. I have an idea of what kind of data and information my kids are actually looking at. I'm not saying I actually enjoy it. I think these issues are complicated. But hopefully with the help of the schools, one way or another, and also support from public institutions, I can have conversations about what would be best for my kids moving forward. I think this is really important, and hopefully this can also come about in other countries besides the obsessed Spanish with data protection. What else did I? So we just bought a new house, and we had the choice between big individual rooms and small common rooms. And we chose for small individual rooms and big common rooms. It's not that I want to watch my kids, but I want to make sure that I understand what they look at, and that we have conversations about this, and that we don't have each with their own screen in their own little room. Because this is how the social fabric of your family basically disappears, and you become too individualistic. As I said, I put on parental controls as well, and we talk about democracy. I sometimes understood who Donald Trump is. I don't know how, but they talk about Donald Trump in playgrounds. It's amazing that you know who the guy is. and then he walks by the TV and goes, that's that game. Okay. But we talk about, democracy. What does it mean to vote? What does it mean to help people? What does it mean that I trust that friend and not that friend? Why do you trust that friend? What do you do? And have conversations about that. I often report internet content, so as I mentioned, certain ads found themselves in certain apps for kids, which is not a great idea, so I complain to business partners. And well, I try to put information into context. When I asked my son, what do you want to be? And he said, I want to be a YouTube star. I was like, okay, well, you're good at future as well. So that's still a conversation that's ongoing. Because those are the examples that they see in front of them. That is success for them. That's worrying. I don't want that. And when I look at, for example, also the games that are put in front of my children, my mother didn't always want to buy the games that I wanted when I was 5 or 10. Now I understand why. They weren't very useful. The games that they build today are very different from the ones that we knew 20 years ago. And it's actually pretty difficult to find good games for your children. This is where there are a lot of challenges that we need to address, and I think there are opportunities as well. My daughter was looking at gymnastics, she's been doing that lately. She was watching videos of girls that were extremely flexible. Flexible to a point where you're like, that's not human. And so I said to her, that is not something you will be able to get to. And I don't want you to get to that point, because this is actually dangerous. She's 6. So the way YouTube videos are influencing her perception of reality or normality is actually scary. So as a parent, you need to stay next to that. Well, thankfully, I'm not saying this is going in the right direction, but I'm doing my best. A couple weeks ago, my son's teacher was like, hey, you know what I do? Okay, cool. Yes, you're trying to save the world from the invasion of the robots. That's not bad. That's going in the right direction. So I would kind of support that. It's complicated for them. If they see examples in schools of, are you a doctor or a policeman? They'll actually work in privacy on the internet. How do you want to explain that to your kids? So there again, evolutions related to what happens between schools and reality are really important. When I started my journey in data analytics, data science, the economists came out with this idea of there's a lot of data out there. We still have a copy of that, the data is huge. A couple of years later, we started talking more about the fact that, well, maybe certain companies are extracting this not super positive. A lot of people talk about this idea of data is the new oil. In Brussels, we talk about data as the new infrastructure or the new electricity. It's going to support our societies one way or another, but we need to find the right balance. Hopefully surrounded by legislation, but possibly other things as well. The ethical challenges that our societies face will not be solved by the law only. We need to create ways of auditing the data. We need to create spaces where, like I did for my children, and how the way schools use the data of my kids. I don't want to be a privacy Taliban, but I did send all these consent forms 3 years ago to all the parents I know in Europe to say this is the way it should be done. So we started to have conversations about that. And then the economists came out not very long ago about this idea of you can't hide anymore. Isn't this kind of worrying? So we should have conversations about this and make sure that we can still be autonomous about our life, make decisions about what we want for us, and for we actually come to those. So a couple of years ago, when I sold my first startup, and I had a lot of money on my bank account, I should have been happy. It lasted about 6 months, I moved to Spain, changed my life, did different things. I'm happy. Happy. Money doesn't make you happy, and so I started a quest for happiness. And I included basically my family in that. So what is happiness to us? And these are conversations we continue to have, and where we have down periods and up periods, where we try to build together as a family to support each other. And these are the discussions we need to have to say, well, for our societies, moving forward according to our European values, what would make us happy? And how can we use data to actually do that in the best ways? This is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much.
That was cool. Ryan, the science director at Co-op, and I'm kind of standing in for Matt. I don't know much like him. That was fantastic.
You're on a platform.
I'm on a platform. I'm slightly taller than that. Phenomenally informative. You've been reading all of your stuff a huge fan. I was not expecting quite such a lesson in parenting. And I have a 4-year-old son, and I am permanently, I believe that I'm an utterly appalled parent. Permanently feel like I'm doing the wrong thing. But I can tell you I'm even more terrified by what's to follow and how on earth one's going to navigate teaching a child through society as now just to read it. And what I thought we'd do is we'll just start by I'll seed a few discussion topics. Perhaps by sort of pull up a few topics to come out and direct to each one. As I did say, you can perhaps introduce yourself briefly. So, just going to flip through another slide.
Yeah, I'm just going to start with my user.
Thank you. So one of the themes that we heard about just then was the right of the individual to choose. And I love the concept of moving from making a suggestion to nudging, and at what point does that flip over to being manipulative. Tim, in your world, you've done a lot of work with engaging with consumers, with marketing, and I'm just getting your experiences and your reflections on how societies, how organisations have evolved over the last years in terms of how they engage with their consumers, and the way you expect that to go.
Yeah.
Each year.
So, hello everyone. I'm Tim. I'm the director of very exceptionally long time for that. Pricing, personalisation, and insight. So, I started out at a company called dunnhumby. I'm guessing some of you might be familiar with them. They started out working at Tesco when they started looking at how they use their Clubcard insight, Clubcard data. And I still remember one of the first things I started doing. I was working with Tesco and Procter & Gamble, and P&G, we were looking at how could we use the information we know about people to target them, to send them a communication. And I still remember sitting down with P&G and they're like, okay, we want to go after personal. We've got to see, well, we want to find all the people that have never bought Ariel ever before, and we want to communicate with them. And at the time, this was still relatively early days, and it was like, okay, I think you could kind of see the marketing logic. You'd be like, this was acquisition, it made sense. Well, sort of made sense. But the reality was when as soon as you looked at the data, you then had this fascinating challenge. Like, well, hang on a second, these people have never bought your product. You're on offer every other week, and they've walked past it, but yet you still want to communicate with them. And actually, they wanted to use this platform as a way of going and communicating and acquiring people because they knew that they'd never bought their product. And we actually started out where Tesco were very good at this. They've got a really good balance of, well, if you're going to do that, well, then you've got to reward some of your loyal customers as well. So that actually this is a trade-off where people will always get some people will always get the thing that they want. Now the reality was that you ended up with this mass piecemeal of lots of people wanting to go and talk to people that fundamentally didn't necessarily have an affinity or an interest in the product they were trying to put out. But that was quite a few years ago, thankfully. Now, as time went on, Tesco evolved their approach, and actually a lot of the manufacturers that work with them massively evolved, completely changed the way they looked at it. And it revolutionised those results as well. And the same as it has, I mean, to be fair, we were a Co-op, we weren't necessarily targeting for acquisition, but we weren't using our data to help people get the most relevant communication. And we weren't removing people that didn't want it. But what we saw was actually we switched that entire paradigm from being I want to do this to you, to being oh, you have done something, which means that actually you'll like this. Oh, we've learned that you do like this. We can actually improve this and create this way of learning such that we can deliver a better result to you. And as a result of that, I mean, it was one of the things I remember when I was working at dunnhumby, everyone would come up to me and they'd go, I love those coupons we get. I love those communicators. I love those coupons we get. It's always the thing that people like, because over time we actually switched it from this idea of I want to push this thing onto you to being what are the things that you would actually want to get. And the fascinating thing was that contrary to this historic kind of marketing belief of acquisition is my path to grow, actually a lot of the growth from giving people what they wanted was far, far higher. And in the world of Co-op as well, where we're still starting out now, well, on our to personalise and get people relevant content. We have seen a massive shift in the results, the interaction of customers, and actually the value that they bring back into the business. So therefore, it's got to be financially sustainable in order to reward people. But we're seeing greater interaction and considerably better returns from actually giving people what they want to get, rather than trying to push the thing that we think we want to do to them. And I think that is ultimately the future path. I think personalization has three things. Make sure that someone gets something. Can't do it. Yeah? And to achieve those three things, you've got to constantly learn. And we were talking earlier on about this idea of a finite project. This isn't a finite project. This is something that customers will tell us, people will tell us what they want to get and when they want to get it.
And building on that, your perspectives on GDPR's come in, there is regulation, there are guidelines, but more important than anything else, how do you embed the right ethics, the right decision making within an organisation so that it just becomes part of how people work every day? Interested in your observations of organisations that have done that well.
Yeah, it's the terms you use with the GDPR are often related to it's a risk exercise as well, because of clients, because of the stakes that's behind it. And obviously, talking about GDPR compliance to companies like Coca-Cola, it's not the same thing as talking to the United Nations foundations and things like that. So their thresholds of what is acceptable and what is not, and what is compliant and what is not, is very, very different. And the legislation is not a technical requirement, so it requires interpretation one way or another to understand what compliance actually means. And there was, for example, a very interesting presentation many years ago by somebody from BBVA, one of the Spanish banks, who talked about clumsy companies, evil companies, and very, very bad. And so depending on incentives of companies, they will interpret the GDPR one way or another. and touch upon those limits of compliance, depending on what they do. And this is what we see with companies like Apple doesn't do the same way as Facebook, because their incentive is also different. Their business model is based on something else. Or their reputation is maybe more important as well. So I see really pilots of white to gray, dark gray areas. And where it's also interesting because the GDPR pushes for this idea of certain companies need a data protection officer. And that person should kind of be independent from the company and help the supervisory authorities like the ICO, but also support the companies in doing the right way, right thing. And so being a DPO is kind of being torn, but you can also choose for which company you want to be a DPO. Being a DPO for Red Cross is not the same thing as being a DPO for Salesforce. So these are already ethical choices you make as an
So you were earlier referring to kind of at what point does nudging behaviour become manipulating, and people have talked about the notion of a kind of creepiness line that you line across. And at the end of the day, it's essentially a test of public opinion. So one of those tests that failed recently, I don't know if people know about the Wi-Fi bins in the City of London, right? So waste bins with Wi-Fi captures on them, you walk past, kind of learn your device, and then give you personalised adverts on the side of the bin as you walked up to it. A little bit like Minority Report, actually. And that went way too far with the creepiness line, and that service was ignored, right? So how do you test public opinion? Like, I guess I'd like to report some of the work that Co-op's been doing in this space to kind of test what is the creepiness line with Co-op members and exploiting data, and for both for the purposes of improving products and services and also improving community engagement. And looking at some of the blogs that Co-op's published, what's really interesting is that Co-op members aren't even speaking with one voice. So that makes it really interesting around the area of consent. Obviously, GDPR is a massive issue. It's important to describe what consent is so that the different opinions of different Co-op consumers, different Co-op members can be properly represented. You also touched on the issue of how do we embed some of this, I guess, cultural change inside organisations, and that's a journey I'm starting to go on with Kainos. So we've done the intro, I head up data analysis capability at Kainos, one of the sponsors here, and we're doing more and more work in machine learning, analytics, artificial intelligence, and so this notion of understanding the ethical implications of what we're doing is becoming more and more important. I think it's right at this stage in development. The interesting question is, though, how do we then embed that in our organisation? And I've asked Ema for some advice on this as well. I think part of it is looking at case studies like what we did before and learn from those. So the Open Data Institute, and Catherine, I know, the Co-op are using the Open Data Institute's Data Ethics Canvas, which helps us understand what are the ethical choices we're making in a particular context. It really is a useful resource, I recommend it. But what's particularly useful about that is you complete it just say one project or one initiative, you get that wider learning in the organisation. I don't think it's sort of doing that.
Yeah, I think it's, we talked about it a bit before as well, it's if we, not in the ethical perspective, maybe before that, within the GDPR's obligation to go through the data protection impact assessments. And where we kind of have the same issue is where do you start with these kinds of assessments and what kind of project or how does it begin? And where basically you start with one, you pick one, and you do that, and you go through the process together with the people within your company. We all learn from that, and we try to iterate and basically do better. And hopefully, from these DPIAs, which are compliance obligations, you go towards ethical frameworks. I think that's like potential road towards that. And where this obligation comes from, the law. So that's interesting, but it's just the baseline. The law just requires baseline. If we can do better, And if we can do better also because we are willing to share best practices because we have no issues around being transparent. That is, I think, around data, the opportunity for collaborative working in certain sectors, more specifically than for private companies. And for example, this allows me also to jump to, for example, something that's very interesting within GDPR is this idea of data portability, which is a new right within the GDPR, which the obligations for companies is just to push data out. If citizens ask for the data under certain conditions, not everything, companies have an obligation to push it out. And if you think about that, it's like, if we get together and we actually do that together, and we build new data repositories one way or another, and we use that to solve issues around society, around what kind of alternative ways of working, we actually create something that is not the Google limitations of this world, but something else. And so again, the GDPR is this kind of starting point towards something.
Earlier about this topic as it relates to the justice system.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that? I love the cartoon that you showed earlier.
Yeah.
What you were missing was the strap line that was underneath. Did you see the cartoon which said, "How could you judge me?" There's actually a little commentary at the bottom which says, "You couldn't possibly understand." So I thought it captures it.
Yeah, so a number of things you were touching on there, that sort of sparked my interest. So that cartoon actually comes from a piece of research in the United States around algorithms that suggest sentences for offenders, but there's no consistency across all the different states to actually implement it in a different way. And what you find sometimes with those types of algorithms is that they can continue to kind of embed institutional discrimination into that process, right? So another reason I started down the data ethics route myself is because I was challenged by one of Kate's clients around the case. So you're suggesting some machine learning around risk assessment, but won't that sort of reinforce some of the stereotypes and discriminations already present in the justice system? I think so basically, I didn't have a ready answer to that question because it's sort of going on this track, right? So the topic I'm particularly interested in takes us away slightly from companies who are custodians of data and our rights as consumers and thinking about governments as custodians of data. And trading off those, the benefits of that around our security with our own personal privacy as well, which is a kind of different type of trade-off, right? So I come from a background working a lot in data exploitation for law enforcement. And one of the things I've noticed is it's quite hard to join up data sets the government owns because there's policy around that, right? And we might say there's good reason for that policy, but in an open forum I'd like to perhaps challenge that. Because sometimes when you're sitting on the other side of the fence, we could join those data sets together, we could get one step ahead of backup, right? So, and how is that policy formed? That policy is supposed to represent and reflect public opinion. So I guess that's one of the things that's really useful about a debate like this, is we can start to find out what public opinion really is.
Brilliant. Should we open it up for questions? Perhaps if you have a question, you can start by just very briefly your name and where you're from, ask your question and who you would like to direct it to. Yes, we have a roving microphone.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Andrew Clark from Media Network. Thank you so much for the contributions. It's been fascinating. Already, you talked a lot about the role of parents and how tricky it is. I would have thought a lot of parents don't feel enabled or in a position to teach their children about safety and ethics online. Do you see educational institutions across Europe where maybe schools or social care providers are starting to help children to navigate this well?
So I have in Spain, so these are the examples that I'm sharing. So on different levels, as a parent within your home, what you have to think about and
how do you protect your children and parental controls on the technology side of it, I think is evolving slowly but surely. The debates and the discussions you need to have with your children as well about the values that certain contents that they see or things like that, and then the support of actually schools. So that handbook is there, you can order it online, and it's actually very useful because it's really courses for not kids of 6 or 7, but for talking about adolescents, where they have discussion about what privacy means and what they can do and things like that. And I think it started a couple of years back around more cyber 28, and it's actually a evolution of that initial movement. Now I do see a lot of differences between countries. So Spain has kind of an obsession with data protection because of their history as well, and their closeness to the GDPR, because their current directive is actually very close to the GDPR, and collaboration around it. So for example, it was really interesting also because we talked about surveillance. The Spanish Data Protection Authority gave prizes about a week ago or 2 weeks ago for best activities around awareness and things like that. It went I would recommend taking a look at what the Spanish Data Protection Authority does. I haven't seen anything like that.
So to continue, to continue that point, there was a debate in a school recently where children were talking about their rights in the context of parents sharing their information about them. So obviously, parents are great at sharing data about their children, there'll be pictures of themselves potties, which are unrestricted. So what are your thoughts to do with where those rights sit? Because obviously the image rights sit with the person who's taking the photograph, but that is in the sort of the legal context, how does that sit with the child who, unfortunately, their rights are quite.
Yeah, so there was an interesting court case in Germany, I think 18 months ago, about a daughter who had too many pictures of her on body on Facebook, and basically she waited until she was 18 to drag her parents in front of the courts. So there is a responsibility also from parents to make sure that what they actually share, and I don't know how it works in the UK, for example, inside playgrounds. You see parents taking pictures. I see more and more parents making sure that they take pictures of only their kids. People are more aware of the fact that maybe they don't want other kids within the pictures and things like that. So education, as a parent, and the responsibility you have in trying to make sure that the fabric of the family is respected as well is part of the discussions we absolutely have to have.
The conclusion of the children's debates was very interesting. They concluded that it was all right for their parents to share pictures of them as long as they were smiling and were happy. If the pictures were looking happy, they didn't mind. They could share as many pictures as they liked. But if they were fully clothed and happy, they didn't mind. It was a general, like 14, 15-year-old children, and they said as long as they were happy and smiling, they didn't mind for any other pictures. The cute pictures of them looking unhappy, they were distressed.
So parents have to ask consent.
Yeah, but legally they don't know, do they?
Yeah.
Well, they're managing their personal brand at that age.
Yeah. My kids look away. They don't watch it. They don't want to see the camera. They're like, no, I don't want to. And we had an interesting story also. My husband decided to buy a smart TV many years ago with like the camera and things like that. And then I was like, well, okay, but settings, everything is off. And then the operating system updated and everything was on again. And so we live in Spain, they go to the swimming pool and they walk around naked all the time in summer. So I put a cache on top of the camera, but it also has speakers. And so basically, at some point, my daughter was playing the video and she threw the thing and she broke the TV. And so I said, well, no more smart TV. And so my husband looked at the folders for the TV and he said, well, let's buy that super simple one. So he went to the supermarket. He said, well, I want that one. And the guy said, no, you want the one with double the things like that. And so my husband said, no, if I buy that, my wife is not going to be happy, so I want that one. He waited 45 minutes for the guy to get it from the end of the warehouse. So it's interesting how we're pushed and nudged to buying stuff for that. So it requires more education on our side to understand what is inside this technology. There's more work to be done, which is why collaboration is important. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask another question. So after GDPR came in, I cannot describe the pleasure of unsubscribing. You know, it's absolutely perfect. And I was interested to see with the rest of the community and federation. So I didn't have a straw poll around the co-working floor and said, you know, of all of the emails that you got the opportunity to opt into, what percentage did you opt in? And the average was between 2 and 4%. Now, I think that's a massive challenge for all companies because they've been used to, if you like, almost lazily accepting that or providing these as metrics. You communicate with X people, but actually what we would learn from 2 to 4% is that that's not meaningful communication. So I'd be interested to hear the perspective from the panelists, how you think that's going to change. To use this as an ROI of effective engagement for the audience.
Yeah, there's probably there's another stat that I'd love to know around that, which is how many then value the content that they get sent on email. So if only 2% actually believe they opted in, actually, is it much more than 2% that actually value what they get sent? And I think that this is playing back to that historic view of I want to send everything, the thing that I want to send to them, and this lack of ability to learn. I think there's going to be a requirement on marketing departments to move away from this idea of what you want to push to what does someone want to hear about, and how do you make it such that they want to hear about, and they have the option to be able to send that back. There's still, even you'll know, we'll be conscious of this, there's this idea of like, if I send out, if I want to double the amount of money I make from emails, I double the size of my distribution list. That logic will still apply to a number of businesses. And really, fundamentally, that's going to be about changing the way that marketing departments look at that, look at their return that they're getting, and stop from this idea, and move away from this idea of this kind of quantum return. That it's actually a customer value exchange and the customer value that they give out per communication, as in it's got to be something that a customer actually wants to receive and that they will actually want to interact with. And that's where this plays to your point around incentives as well. Mm-hmm. This kind of idea of if you're solely chasing a profit number, well, yeah, I double the number I send out and I don't worry about it too much. But the future and the ability to use data is going to be founded on trust. There is a stick out there, which is GDPR, but there's this massive carrot, which is actually when people really like the use of it and actually get it and understand it, they embrace it and they really do appreciate it. I mean, there's potential for that to be misused, which we need the legislation in place to make sure that that doesn't take us down that path. But there is a massive value to be added to us, and there's this incentive to do that in the right way.
And that was also the promise of social media at some point, this idea of word of mouth. It's worth it, so I'm going to share it with my friends and things like that until it got big. And I remember in the times of digital when click-through rates were about 5%. We were testing stuff with Lycos years and years ago, and those click-through rates were not too bad. Today they're absolutely ridiculous. And when you think about it, marketing is about trying to convince people that that product is worth it. And when I joined kind of digital analytics or web analytics, my idea was we're going to make products better. So that word of mouth will work.
And this is not what we've seen. We've seen some form of a hijacking of, pardon my French, but shoving products down people's throats, basically, while the products were not getting any better. And this is something that needs to be rebalanced one way or another so that we can use this idea of word of mouth and trust in a better way. So this requires responsibility on the side of the companies to make sure that they actually do the right thing.
I completely agree with that. I see there being a shift from quantity to quality. What matters is going to be the relevance and the quality that I perceive as the person that's receiving anything. And I, genuinely believe that the organisations that will be most successful will deliver the greatest quality, build the greatest trust, which in turn will actually mean that consumers will be willing to allow those organisations to learn more about them to increase the quality and in fact the purchase cycle.
And I guess some organisations will be forced to move away from directed email and postal marketing and more towards some of the web analytic techniques. And if people have said no to cookies and cookie walls are not allowed anymore, there are other techniques, cameras, fingerprinting, some of this crazy extent now. So I think it will also drive some companies down different technological avenues.
Yes, there's going to be escalation as well. That's inevitable. It's been going on for a while. So digitals are getting more ecosystem as well. But it will be interesting to see also as citizens understand better what's going on, how this kind of power rebalances, because that's what the GDPR gives. It's like it's a tool for you to complain. Go to your supervisory authority, knock on their door. They have an obligation to take on things. So the method hopefully does something better. Let's see.
Probably got time for one or two more questions.
It's interesting, thank you. Hi, my question's a bit early, actually. It's interesting that as GDPR has come in, and looking across Europe and the countries in human response there too, have you seen a pattern of distinction in terms of companies that came really late to the party of putting out these minute T's opt-in, versus companies that addressed this 2 years ago?
So I work for a company that started 18 months ago. And it was interesting on the transport company. I overheard the chief of staff, because I'm just the DPO behind this, where she made a list of everything they did. And I was super impressed. I've seen companies I've talked to 2 years ago who said, what's the GDPR? And they are information officers for those big technology companies. I've seen a bit of everything, but obviously before January of this year, there was not a lot of interest, to be honest, and kind of went crescendo of that.
Again, I would say as a human being, every company has emailed me asking me to update my subscriptions in the last X many weeks, which aren't many. I don't read those emails, they're spam, so I'm lapsed. Right? But people that moved my opt-ins and my relationship with them over time to the perspective where I now see a value-added service relationship that's reciprocated, I've not seen an email from them, and my relationship hasn't changed.
Yeah, interesting. So it signals something from them as well, that they were like panicked and they did that not the last time, and just delete.
You had a question about.
Hi, my name is Chris Banks from Terry Land Rover, and I just wanted to touch on some of the things you mentioned earlier, saying about the shift you saw years ago, engaging with people, and what they're engaged in. You mentioned, I know there's a lot of talk recently about basically those becoming confirmation bias like platforms where they're just focusing in creating your interactions, your feeds, and views that you read on the biases that you have, so implications have. But where do the responsibility lies with obviously the use of that data that's driving that? Does that lie with the company, with governments, or with society to address that? As long as you believe that is obviously creating a problem in our society. What are your thoughts?
I think it's an absolutely brilliant question, and the whole concept of filter bubbles. That's how I've heard that we've been referred to before, and is quite terrifying actually. And you can totally understand how a lot of the events that are happening now, as in you see this greater polarization of viewpoints where people are looking to group under different things, and this reinforcement of your own view, and the ability to be able to take in and hear other opinions and viewpoints becomes very, very difficult unless you do proactively go out and seek them. And in terms of where responsibility to resolve that lies, I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know. I think it is a societal problem. I mean, if you look at it doesn't necessarily need to be an online problem. You could look at the challenges of diversity, equality. Actually, a lot of these are rooted in the filter bubbles that we've created. Yeah, I think about like the people that influence you and impact you are often quite like you. Yeah, and it's not necessarily a new societal problem. It's just one that's more focused and more prevalent and easier to kind of expand and grow with the online.
Amplified.
Yeah, amplified. That's exactly what I was looking for. You should do a spot. That's exactly what I was looking for. But that is the challenge, and I think that we haven't necessarily solved it. We've put in steps, and we're going to learn. And I think it will probably be a combination of all of the things that you talked about that we're going to need to solve for.
I would agree. I think it's really interesting. I think GDPR has absolutely the right intent behind it. But you only have to look at the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica debacle recently to realise that technology and what is technically possible now has far outpaced the debate in society around what we consider to be okay. Possible is the wrong word, but you've got technology and capability that's got in place. You've got regulation that actually is doing a pretty good job of keeping up, but there's a lag time there. And you've got your society needs to have the debate to move around what do we feel is appropriate and what balance we look around that. And it's going to be that's next generation are going to be continuing that discussion.
I think related to filter bubbles, there's also a discussion to have, and maybe you can try and explore it, about algorithms and the fact that we want recommendations, and within those recommendations there is no possibility for serendipity, or let's just push something that has nothing to do with it. And that's a choice of building an algorithm. You say, well, I'll take 60% of recommendations because of the system, and then I'll take something related to something else, and I'll build my algorithm in another way. I think this is where transparency related to how these recommendations come about is important. We need to have conversations about this. Where companies usually hide behind those intellectual properties you can't know, which doesn't make sense because supervisory authorities can actually ask these questions. But it's how do we build these algorithms? And there was somebody also called Tristan Harris was talking about how we were making technology addictive to individuals. These are choices. The fact that when I start up Netflix, something ends and I have like these 15 seconds before the next thing starts, I hate that. Because I love that. so make it a choice. Make it a way to configure how Netflix actually works. And this is one of the challenges also is we can do a lot with technologies and we can surface a lot of these choices actually. But then it's about people actually understanding those choices. Privacy settings inside Facebook 3 years ago were a lot less complicated than what they are today. And they're not perfect. Having said that, I confess. But they have an interesting challenge of education, surfacing those choices. What does it mean? User experience, what does it mean? How do I use the data? And our systems are getting more complex also. And this is also where I can align with you related to legislation. When you think about how legislation modelizes the world, it's too simple. They talk about controllers and processors and maybe joint controllers. These are like the 3 roles that we see. I see about 17 different roles depending on how
data actually moves, and this is where legislation is not there yet. But companies can have responsibilities to say, this is how I build my algorithm, and I add serendipity inside this as well. Is that possible? Does that make sense? So if we're transparent and we have conversations about this, maybe we can do better. But it's true, nobody knows how to solve these issues.
It's all about trade-offs, isn't it? Because there's a famous book in economics called Paradox of Choice.
Yeah.
It's basically saying there's so much choice it becomes a disutility very quickly. And recommendation engines are a great way of kind of solving that for large sections of what we might want to consume. So as I was talking to the manager of 3D News earlier today, I was thinking about my own experience with the new Amazon music streaming service. I shared my musical preferences with them, and they have now suggested loads of other music I've never thought of. So without Amazon Music, too much other music out there, I was just stuck with the Pet Shop Boys, very narrow music focus. It's really broadened my horizon, right? And I just kind of thinking maybe as we conclude whether we should consider what one or two pieces of advice we should give to our children, or what, in this area, what do you think we want to teach our children? And certainly that would be one thing for me, which is understand which areas you're happy to be recommended to, and are happy to kind of, okay, I'm happy that the algorithm's made some choices there, I'm enjoying this music. I guess the second one would be, it's very hard to be truly forgotten. So be careful.
Fabulous. Well, we could continue this conversation all evening, but I suggest we retire to the bar and continue the conversation over a few minutes. So that leaves me to say a huge thank you to Bill and to Tim for joining me. And thank you all for coming and making the event. The upcoming events, fantastic. So if I can put in a pitch to the continuation of these events, I think the next event coming up is Shannon, which is shaping up to be an absolutely fascinating topic. So please do come along. I believe that this one was going to be an online meetup as well. Is that right? A live, excellent. So you can sign up now. Fantastic. Thank you.